Are you ready to set your authentic self free? Welcome to Your Unapologetic Life, the podcast with me, Morgan Barkus. This podcast is full of my personal stories, advice, and strategies, as well as book recommendations to help you ditch comparison and society's standards for us women so you can finally reveal who you truly are. Are you ready to live out loud? Let's get this party started. I have a very special guest, my first time guest ever, Jess Sargus. Jess Sargus is the powerhouse behind The Legal Athlete and a sought-after motivational speaker known for her dynamic, transformative talks on mental performance mastery, mindset shifts, and neuroplasticity. With 22 plus years of experience in law, business, and combat sports, including roles at Marvel Studios, Disney, and a unicorn startup. Jess brings a unique blend of grit, science, and strategy to the stage. As an undefeated former boxer, MMA fighter, and professional combat sports coach, Jess knows firsthand what it takes to perform under pressure and rise to any challenge. Her speeches are packed with actionable insights, helping audiences burn down limiting beliefs, make small but powerful mindset shifts, and train their brains to become the person they've always wanted to be. Thank you for being here, Jess.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
My first question, because when I look at you, I don't think boxer or MMA fighter. So tell me, one, how did you get into it? Two, what is the difference between being a boxer and an MMA fighter? Tell me some stories.
Okay, so I got into boxing was my gateway drug to combat sports. I got into boxing actually my first year of law school. I
Okay.
had a friend who was taking some boxing classes, and he knew I liked to work out pretty hard. And he's like, I think you should try boxing. And I looked at him. He was this 6'5", 400-pound former offensive lineman from the University of Washington. I'm like, I'm not going to boxing with you. But he's like, no, you just hit a bag and you do the things. So I went and I grew up, on a horse farm. So I had this weird functional strength that had no place for anywhere else. And I started boxing and I realized that I could hit things kind of hard and that there was a lot more to it than just trying to kill each other, that there was strategy and sort of like a physical chess game. So I fell in love with the sport, and I trained in it for about 10 years, not competing at that time just because I had started worked at a pretty conservative law firm. And I figured the fast track to getting asked to leave was showing up with black eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
So for 10 years, I was a good law firm citizen and did not compete, though I kept training. And then after 10 years, I started to realize that this wasn't my goal environment. And so I was willing to take the risk of a black eye, started competing, and then met some friends who were training in mixed martial arts. At that time, it was like the dawn of mixed martial arts. I don't remember like the first Ultimate Fighter show that came out, this reality show with people who were doing mixed martial arts. And I was an avid fan, but I'd never considered doing it myself until I met people who were doing mixed martial arts. And the difference between mixed martial arts and boxing is just striking with your hands on your feet. Mixed martial arts can be any martial arts combined, but there's both a striking on your feet component, but you can use hands, elbows, back fists, all kinds of things, plus kicking and kneeing and, all of those things on your feet, plus a grappling or wrestling component. And then there's what we call the ground game, which are things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, things like that. So I started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and collegiate style wrestling and Muay Thai kickboxing, as well as the boxing. And it felt like I was going from a regular chess game, physical chess game, to 3D chess. And so I was hooked on that.
And from a practical standpoint, as a woman, as you're talking, I'm thinking, wow. Okay, so I feel like I'm kind of tough. I was robbed many years ago when I was a young 20 something and just being a little careless too late at night. And nothing crazy happened. I told the guy off and he punched me and I ran away and whatever. I I couldn't like fight for my life.
Mhm.
Do you feel safe when I mean, obviously you're not immune to everything, but I listen to a lot of crime podcasts or true crime podcasts. And I just thought, man, Jess is like maybe somebody that when she sees something happening or she's in a situation, she knows she could protect herself. Is that true?
Yes. Yes and no. The short answer is yes.
Okay.
The the bigger explanation is when you train and fighting and self-defense, you learn that the best fight is the one you can avoid. And so, my best self-defense instruction whenever I was teaching was, maintain awareness. And if you feel like something might be a bad situation, leave immediately, avoid it. Don't take the darker path, all of those things, because your best defense is to not get into a situation where you have to physically defend yourself. That said, do I feel like my chances are better than the average person's? Yes, I do. But I
Yeah.
would never want to test that. And, I
Oh,
don't have any anti weapons training or anything. So,
okay.
knives or, pow pows, I would never want to have to deal with. But just a physical altercation, particularly because I'm a sleeper agent. They don't see me and be like, oh, I she's probably able to kick my ass, and it's true, but they don't think it. So
Of course.
it makes me feel better, and it gives me a sense of confidence. That's the
Mhm.
other thing that I try to impart to women in self-defense classes is if you look like you'd be a problem, like you'd be work, then you're less likely to be a victim than someone who's, distracted and carrying themselves really small and, not paying attention to what's going around. You want to look like you'd be a problem, because usually people who are trying to attack someone else or particularly rob them, it's a crime where they want to do it as easily as possible and get away as easily and quietly as possible. So
Yeah.
carrying yourself a little bit different, which I hope I do, makes you a little bit, again, less likely to be the top choice.
That reminds me of a time I lived in Minneapolis and I was in graduate school. I went to this coffee shop all the time because they were open 7 days a week till midnight. And so I would go late. And there was a time where this gentleman, it was dark, it was late, and he walked right up to me. And I looked right in his face and I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And then he just left. And I thought, oh, he probably thinks this girl's probably not going to be an easy target.
Yep.
No. Anyway, so good thing we're talking about confidence. All right. Do you have a fun story that you share before I get into science? Because you're a science gal and I want to hear all about it when it
Mhm.
comes to confidence and comparison. Do you have a fun story from your days at whether it was Disney or Marvel or just something where you felt like really charged or it was really a memorable experience for you?
I mean, there's so many memorable experiences. I will say probably one of my most most epic experiences at a social media creator company, the unicorn tech company that I worked at. We represented and or had contractual services with a lot of creators, some big name creators that you would know. And one of the big creators, actually a person who has some billboards around our town right here in Austin. Um, he had an opportunity that he wanted to pursue with another company that was a direct conflict with his contract with us. And his agent had called and berated my sales team, just like overly aggressively, all the toxic masculinity triggers that you can think of. That's what he did. And so my sales team contacted me and said, hey, this sounds like a legal issue. And I said, say no more, because I'm always nice. I'm always polite first, and I try to be very warm and conciliatory. But the number one way to get on my bad side is to mistreat someone on my team, someone I'm responsible for. So we got in a call. He tried to pull the same belligerent, I know what the contract says, but, are you really telling me you're going to enforce it? And I said, yeah, that's what a contract is. And he was so upset and he started yelling, and I shut him down and I said, no, like, we're not going to speak like that. You might have gotten the impression you could speak like that to my team. Number one, that's wrong. Number two, you speak to me now. And number three, if you want to have a conversation, I'll have a conversation with you, but the outcome is going to remain the same. And he got very frustrated. One of my other team members, a guy, started talking with him, and he had acknowledged, okay, I guess this isn't permitted, blah 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 blah. And in the middle of conversation, like a 5-year-old who was triggered, he looked at me again, this is all on Zoom. He looked at me, he's like, Jess is looking at me. And I'm like, yeah, that's something a person does. And he completely lost it. We ended up resolving things. They agreed, yeah, okay, we're not going to do that extra thing. But from the next 3 years while I worked with the team, anytime that they had an issue with a creator or a creator's rep, they're like, let's get Jess on the call. So it sort of became legendary, particularly for the blow up afterwards with Jess is looking at me.
Did he not
want
like
that
the
look.
eye contact?
What?
Did he not like the eye contact?
He didn't like he didn't like this. He didn't like the look, like I was not timid or afraid, or about to back down. It didn't work with his one strategy, which was being a bulldog.
Yeah,
He didn't
tantrum.
he didn't roll with that punch. So he preferred not to try to deal with me directly the rest of the relationship, because he knew what the answer was if he did.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you are a powerful woman. And you obviously personally have done difficult things. Hello, law school. Very difficult. Law school itself, but then also just being a lawyer is a very competitive environment. And then obviously with your sports background and boxing and MMA in particular, along your journey, have there been times where comparison has come up for you? As you know, I'm a body image coach, so I work with women on, their insecurities, or, and these are successful, career-driven women, and there's still something that they're not projecting to everybody, but there's some stuff inside where there's comparison and insecurity and what have you. And they might feel really powerful in one area, whether it's mostly usually their career, or that they're a stellar mom or whatever it is. And there's some insecurities, and some of it comes from comparison. I mean, there's just so much around us. There's, whether it's in the work environment, on the social media, whatever it is, and wanted to talk to you about comparison and some of the psychological mechanisms behind that, and the psychological damage that it can actually do. That it's not just like, oh, this doesn't feel good. There's some real science behind that. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that. And then also, in your career as an athlete and a lawyer, how you've handled that and learned how to regulate that or deal with it yourself.
Sure. Which would you like me to talk about first? The science
Well, let's
of
hit the
it or the
science.
stories?
Yeah, let's get the science first, because it's
Okay.
like, what does it actually do in our body? And
Sure.
then what do we do with those things that are happening in our body emotionally and physically?
Sure. Well, as humans, we are social creatures, and there are parts of our brain, lots of parts of our brain actually, that are involved in this social relationship. Our reward system, the ventral striatal system, it evaluates our successes and our failures relative to others. And so when our brain perceives some sort of comparison that is a negative comparison, that ventral striatum system sees a lack or a failure, even if we have objectively significant achievements of our own. And so what happens there is our body is assessing a threat, a negative comparison. So it suppresses dopamine release, dopamine being that happy boost that we get usually when we're scrolling and you see fun puppy videos. Dopamine, boom, we get that hit, we love it on social media. When you engage in comparison, that gets suppressed because you're evaluating yourself negatively compared to someone else. And particularly if we're talking about women and body image, that can be really emotionally painful. And where that comes in from a neuroscience aspect is another part of the brain that's activated in self-referencing is our default mode network. That is what activates usually during periods of rest or introspection, but it's our self-referential thinking and how we see ourselves and the role in the world. And so when we engage in comparison, that default mode network gets highly active. And when we're making a negative comparison, it also activates what's called our anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, and that's linked to emotional pain and conflict. And so when those get activated, we're feeling emotional pain very similar to physical pain. And it can be demoralizing. It can be stressful, particularly if you're doing it on a regular basis. It can lead to some chronic stress. If it's going to your core sense of identity, sometimes it can even release some of those stress hormones like cortisol or epinephrine or norepinephrine, our fight or flight neurotransmitters. And that can lead to cortisol fatigue if you do it over and over again, and you're in this negative comparison spiral. You can even lead to experiences of burnout, emotional irritability and sadness and a lack of motivation. So it can actually trigger, the more that you engage in these negative comparison thoughts, it can actually trigger a negative neurotransmitter spiral and lead to some emotional, and then ultimately it can be physical aspects of stress that are not good for us, either mentally or physically in terms of our health.
Now, Jess, when someone, because I feel like some folks are very introspective.
Yep.
And some people are very good at emotionally regulating.
Mm-hmm.
Like even this morning, I was feeling anxious about something. And I thought, all right, let me get into my body. Where am I feeling this? Why am I feeling this? And how do I reframe this or restory this? And I'm like, oh, and then I turned it around and it was like, and not everybody is, I mean, I'm fortunate. I'm very grateful that I have a master's in therapy because I learned a lot about myself and how to emotionally regulate and all the things. And not everyone does that. They're scrolling on the social media or they are comparing themselves to other girlfriends of theirs. And if they're in a place where they can recognize it and go, I think I'm doing a bad thing right now. Like, this is not making me feel good. Is there a way, or what are some practical ways to then do the reverse? Because as you were talking, I thought, okay, if they catch themselves and they go, wait a second, I'm spiraling and I'm going into a negative place. I'm feeling the bad feelings. I'm getting, my dopamine is being suppressed. Is there a way to then reverse that? Can I put it in reverse and now flip it and do, like, what could they do to pull themselves out of that and literally change themselves chemically?
So I think one of the ways I use this not only in my work with legal professionals, but definitely use it as a sports psychology technique, is a switch in perspective. The big overall perspective, and this isn't going to be good in the moment, but I'm going to lay the context for it, is a switch between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
So glad you brought that up. I was going to
Mhm.
ask you. I actually wrote that down. I was like, well, I want her to explain that. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So a fixed mindset, we believe we are who we are. We're as good as we're ever going to get. And that we're not going to be able to change significantly or improve significantly over our lives. And that can lead to some very negative comparisons if you feel like they're better in some way, and I'm never going to be able to do that. Whereas a growth mindset believes that through work, through effort, through enrichment, you can improve, you can grow, you can change your circumstances. Circumstances aren't fixed. Outcome isn't fixed. It all depends on a variety of factors, and you can grow and change and improve over the course of your life. And when you do that, it's also, not to be woo woo, but it's going from a lack mentality to an abundance mentality. And so the actionable thing for you is, if you realize you're engaging in this negative self-reference, try what I'm going to call the you go girl technique. Is It's an abundant world, and just because someone is very pretty or very fit, try thinking to yourself, you go girl, because that's a something, you're seeing something you appreciate about them, and
I
there's
like
enough
that.
of that for
Yeah.
us to go around. It doesn't mean that you aren't wonderful in your own unique ways. It doesn't mean also that you couldn't change or grow to get closer to what you feel like is your best version of yourself. But it doesn't have to be the same exact way someone else presents. And you can
Mhm.
appreciate that. You can give them a you go girl, and go from this lack mentality to an abundance mentality. And that starts to change the trigger from self-referencing negatively to more of a social bonding experience, where this is aspirational. You're seeing something that if you're envious, you're like, that'll never be me. That's not something I can achieve. Or if you're appreciating it, you're like, oh, that's something I would love to emulate more of. And that's not for me, but you know what? I think it's great. You go, girl. There's enough of this for us to go around. So that's my number one tip, is try to shift your perspective from negative to a positive one.
That you go girl. I love that. I love that because that's the internal work. I mean, you can do that when you're on social media and you're scrolling, you see
Hmm.
something, maybe you're triggered,
Yep.
and instead of feeling negative about it or feeling less than, you can say, "You go, girl."
Hmm.
And then maybe take it the next step and you're out and you see someone and you're like, "Those pants look amazing on you." Or, and then now you're complimenting other people.
Hmm.
And my next question is, what has been your experience when you're working with other people or even yourself when it
Hmm.
comes to now your social circle? And I say this because back in 2000 and I don't even remember, this was probably maybe 2006, I started, always loved fitness and working out. And I
Hmm.
just did it at the home gym where I grew up. My parents, they were still at 70 are working out. I'm so proud of them.
It's
Anyway,
wonderful.
yeah, so they always had a home gym, so I kinda learned how to work out by following, like, Joe Weider stuff
Hmm.
and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and
Yes.
anyway, then I started doing group fitness, really enjoyed that, and in particular, I started, taking classes and then teaching at an exotic dance and fitness studio in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and what I noticed for myself and then other women would tell me, this is such a safe place. All of us are here. We're not comparing ourselves. We're not paying attention to anybody else. We're just focused on us and how we're moving and our confidence and our sensuality. And sometimes when I go outside of this circle or outside of this studio, I notice other women aren't as supportive.
Hmm.
And I'm finding that there's a little bit, there's the comparison or backstabbing or just nastiness in general. So anyway, what has been your experience and what do you tell folks um, about their friend circle or the folks they're hanging out with and how to change that? Or even if they don't go and change their friends, maybe they can change the dynamic. How, if you could
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, It's complicated. It's easy to give simple answers, but we know relationships are deeper than that. Uh, the simple answer is, if someone is not there with your best interest, if you have someone in your friend group who's just tearing people down, tearing you down, you always end up feeling less energy or feeling bad about yourself when you're around them, and they're not receptive to a conversation about how they may be communicating or how they're coming off, then for me, separation is the only answer. You don't need to have people in your circle who are giving you that kind of energy, because life is hard enough. Growth is hard enough without having someone who is handicapping you in that way. And you're ultimately only responsible for your own behavior. You only have a limited amount of time to spend with people. It should be people who are there to help you grow, who are there to support you, who make you feel better and with more energy after you're with them. And so I would say just love yourself enough to be precious with your time. And if someone isn't making the best use of your time, then find other people to spend time with, or spend time with yourself. My favorite thing is to date myself sometimes,
Yeah.
because I can go to the movies I want to go to, or I can just zone out and get a pedicure, and enjoy the massage chair more than probably a person should. And so I think just trying to be intentional about where you allow your energy to be spent, and try to keep people around you who are, um, if not on the same journey and wavelength as you, supportive of it. Um, it's a compounding effect too when you have people who are supportive of you. But it is a fact of life that there are some people who like to yuck your yum, and that's a lack in them. I try to think of it as a compassion exercise too, which is, there's something that they're feeling that is not good, or they might be feeling a negative comparison in some way, or insecure about what they've been working on. And it comes out as attacks or negativity towards other people. So I try to think about it with a compassionate view rather than a self-referential view, and then I try to get distance from it. If a conversation, if there's a valuable relationship there and a conversation doesn't change it, then your best strategy is some distance. But I think in terms of things that I struggle with or have struggled with, at various times in my life, it is the negative self-reference to compared to some other women. I think fighting and fight sports was a gift for me, because while it's a weight class based competition, so you're always aware of where your weight is compared to when you need to weigh in at a certain weight. It's not just one women's weight class. I fought at the bantamweight, which is 135 pounds, which meant that I was normally walking around during training between 140 and 150 pounds, which you might talk to people who have an outdated view of a woman is someone who weighs 125 pounds or less, and that would have been less than me and my bones. So um so having an idea that there are different sizes of bodies, and that's why there's different weight classes for fighting, was great. But also with fighting, weight classes aside, there's a focus on what your body can do versus what it looks like. And I found, as a woman, particularly as a woman who is more and more conscious of longevity now that I'm in my late 40s, is uh, trying to figure out what my body is capable of doing, and focusing on, what can I lift? How far can I stretch? Can I walk and enjoy the surroundings without being out of breath, and taking myself out of that present moment because I'm trying to breathe. So this function, um, functionality and enjoyment aspect of what am I capable of doing, and enjoying the power of that. I think that's been the greatest gift in terms of self-reference, particularly in body image. But there's certainly times, and if you want, I can tell a story. There's certainly been times when I've I've compared myself to another fighter. Both
Yes, I love
both
stories. Go for
Okay.
it.
All right. So this is one of my favorite stories. Um it was after the end of my competitive fighting career, but I was still training regularly at a top mixed martial arts gym. It was Long Island at the time.
Now,
And
Jess,
there
super fast. When you say competitive, are you like, this is your job and you're getting paid? Is it like, excuse my ignorance here, but I don't, when you say competitive, what does that mean?
It means that you're actually fighting in competitions, and it can be either amateur, which is the level that I wasn't getting paid, or professional, where you are getting paid.
Okay.
And so my whole career was an amateur career. I was training with professionals. I was training with UFC fighters, men and
Wow.
women, but I was a full-time lawyer for most of my fight career. And there were reasons, both time-based and both capital-based, that I didn't get to that leap to professional myself. But I certainly trained with folks who were, and so I was training with a bunch of pros on Long Island. It was Longo and Weidman at the time. Now it's Longo Mixed Martial Arts. Ray Longo is a legendary coach. And there's a couple UFC current champions who train out of there now who are friends of mine. But I was training with the guys there, and I learned through Ray that there was a woman, a boxer who was a really good young boxer in her late 20s, who was about to compete in the ultimate amateur boxing competition in New York City for the whole New York City area, called Golden Gloves. It became the Metro, but people know it as Golden Gloves, and she needed a sparring partner. And she was about my weight, but she was 4 inches taller. She was 5'10", young, blonde, lean, everything that as a muscly, strong as bull body type I never was. Brunette, everything that society thinks about the typical woman. She was gorgeous. She also had the benefit of her technique. Her boxing technique was pretty and smooth. She was light on her feet. My boxing technique is crafty, it is powerful, but it is not pretty. It is not smooth. I'm very heavy on my feet. And if I had looked at it saying, "Oh my gosh, like there's this woman, and she's so pretty and thin, oh God, she's also smart and funny." I like to think that I'm smart and sometimes funny, but she's got it all. And if I had looked at it in a negative comparison way, I would have been really intimidated. But instead, I flipped it. I had this growth mindset, and I'm like, what can I learn from this? And two, how can I challenge myself to try to get the best of her and really make her sparring as difficult as possible, so that not only do I feel better about my skills in comparison, but the ultimate goal was to prepare her as fervently as possible so that she could win Golden Gloves. And so we went and we had our first sparring session, and I had prepared. She had longer reach on me, and I knew her jab was pretty. I was planning on just intimidating. So every time I saw her jab coming, I was trying to be faster, cut inside, get inside, and basically punish her every time she threw her jab. And it was a technique that worked. She started to throw it less. She started to let me get in closer, because I was using that aggression and that ring generalship that I had developed over a course of training and competing that she didn't have at that point. But at the end of that sparring match, she was better in some rounds, I was better in some rounds, and it was so competitive that after that, her coach and she asked me to come back. And we became what I call punch face friends. And so I was her sparring partner that entire fight camp. She was so well prepared going to that competition. She ended up winning the entire Golden Gloves competition, the Metro, for her weight class that year. And I was so proud of her. And she's wonderful. She's continued to compete. Her competing days are gone now too. She's actually expecting her first child, which I'm really excited for her. But if I had gone into it with a negative feeling and not trying to give my best, I wouldn't have given her my best. She wouldn't have been as prepared, and I wouldn't have had, I think, the ultimate positive experience that even though I didn't win every round, I didn't always get the upper hand. I felt very proud of how my strategy and my skills matched up against someone who empirically has a much brighter future, certainly a longer future at that point than I had. So it ended up being a really positive experience because I was focused on my unique skills and how they matched up against hers, and really a you go girl mentality too. Like, thank goodness, you win that whole thing.
As you were talking, I was thinking, this is her you go girl,
Yeah.
because it was one to her, like, you go girl, you're amazing, you have all
Hmm.
these amazing qualities. And you were also saying it to yourself, like,
Hmm.
you go girl, I have my unique qualities and the things that I'm really good at. What I also was thinking is not every woman is out there fighting,
No,
right?
no.
And yet, whether it was, your weight because of the sport, or
Hmm.
your muscularity because of the sport, technique, whatever it was, you were comparing, and because you were in that environment, and
Hmm.
I couldn't help but think it's circumstantial environment
Yep.
dependent too. I
Hmm.
remember when I lived in South Florida, there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way,
Hmm.
to age a certain way,
Hmm.
to the point where, like, this gal was waxing my eyebrows and she's like, Morgan, it's time for Botox. And this was like almost 10 years ago. And I have yet to do it. I'm not going to do it. It's just not my choice. And there was an expectation. And I could start to feel myself, compare myself to other
Hmm.
people, so, whether it's, I have short hair, not women down there, not a lot of women wear short hair, or, there was just certain things. And that if you don't embrace, like you did, the uniqueness, and that you do have these certain assets, and this is how I am, and this is what I am, and I'm going to just go with this and do the best that I can do and best that I can be. So yeah, I was just thinking, like, in different environments, whether it's literally geographically, or if you're in sports or certain careers, or there is a pressure. I'm sure supermodels they're in this whole other category of, I can't even imagine how much pressure and comparison they have to deal with on a daily basis. So it's it's kind of all the same thing, like going back to the science, and
Yeah.
yet the circumstances can be different.
Yeah. And it really, it depends on again the group that you're in, the community that you're in, and it can be a negative experience, a negative reference in comparison to the group. But that's when, one of my defensive, actionable tips is build your own community, build your support system of people who actually care about you. And so the societal or regional social norms that you are either comparing yourself against, or you're hearing it like from your from your lady, oh, this is what's expected. It's great to have a social system where you can, like, text your friend, you're like, can you believe this, and you can laugh about it together. You can take it with a grain of salt because you know what really matters. But I don't want to give short shrift to the fact of that experience is real, and that having someone tell you, oh, this is what's expected, or having those pieces of information coming at you is difficult. So that's why having those support systems and then being in touch with yourself and realizing when that's happening to you and making the conscious choice to flip the script on it. To go for, all right, well, that may be so, but I don't necessarily agree with that. That's not for me. That's okay for you. You go, girl, but that's not for me.
Exactly.
And practicing not only that, but I think gratitude, switching from thinking about what you're not or what you don't have to being grateful for the
Mhm.
things that you do have, the things that you are, I think is a great way also to combat that and start releasing those, to go back to science, those positive neurotransmitters, that dopamine from when you are feeling a positive self-reference, or even I think it's a hack, but one of the most powerful mental boosts you can give yourself is movement. It is taking a walk, getting some exercise, and you're going to start feeling better just because your muscles are releasing these great endorphins. Your neurotransmitters are firing the way they need to fire, and those things, they might not be particular conscious mental strategies, but they really work. And then you'll find your thought patterns are starting to change in different ways as well.
I like that. I talk about movement for the sake, because don't get me wrong, after having disordered eating and major issues for well over a decade, I used to use movement as punishment
Mm-hmm.
and a way to purge. And it was very dysfunctional. And now when people ask me, like, what do you do for workouts or whatever? And I'm like, really, whatever I feel like. Because now it's to the point where it's like, I eat for my weight, but not even really. I eat to be healthy and sustain my body, and I work out because it feels good, and I only do what feels good. If 10 minutes on the treadmill is all I have in me today because I'm PMSing or I'm tired or whatever it is, that's all I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other days where I feel powerful and I'm in the weight room and I'm like, yes, that was awesome. But I just, like you said, the movement is because you can, and your body is what it is. And do you, I mean, I've certainly noticed, I'm sure you have too, being in your 40s,
Mm-hmm.
things have changed. And I think one of the things I notice with a lot of women, it's like this constant fight
Mm-hmm.
with their bodies, whether it's aging or how that's changed after kids or whatever it is. It's like they're fighting against something that's gone
Mm-hmm.
or never going to be the same again. And rather than, like you said, loving and accepting what your body is capable of, always fighting with themselves. What would that maybe do to them physically, mentally, and how you've dealt with it, even? Because all of us women, I think women more than men, have dealt with the aging thing and just how our bodies have changed, and really going, well, this is what it is now. And I'm either going
Mm-hmm.
to fight it and hate it, or I'm going to love it.
Mm-hmm.
So what has that been like for you?
It's been a journey, not just as a woman, now in my upper 40s, but also as a former athlete. You
I was
know,
thinking about that. Like,
it
after you're in such good shape and you're always training, and now you're
in
probably not.
such great shape, and one of the reasons why I stepped away from competing was the things in my body that used to bend during training started to snap.
Oh,
I was in a training session with a teammate, and we were just doing some warm up grappling drills, nice and gentle, but drills where we were bending each other this way and bending each other that way, and he bent me one way and I felt a pop. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh yeah, your cartilage tore in between your ribs. I'm like, okay, well, what do I do? He's like, first of all, nothing. And second of all, things are going to keep doing that. Like that's just the way old cartilage is. It's
mm,
not as flexy as it used to be. And, I tore a ligament, weightlifting, and all of these things. I wasn't able to get away with as much rough and tumble without suffering for it. This was
Mhm.
now I stopped competing when I was 38. And so things again weren't as live as they used to be. I was never a fast fighter, but I wasn't as fast as I was even when I started. And My running speed, over the decades since now, still is not as fast as I used to be. And I think it's been difficult. It was more difficult early on, accepting that transition. A lot of athletes have huge problems, particularly when they're so tied into athletics as their personal identity, and they don't have a big identity outside of it. It's a really unmooring thing for an athlete to go through, and luckily I had this whole entirely different professional life. But even that, when you tie your identity too closely to one thing, it makes you very vulnerable if something difficult or something unmooring happens in that one thing. So I
Mhm.
think one of the things that helped me get through that was focusing on my profession, but also as I've gotten into my 40s, um, I spent a lot of years fighting against it. And what happens, when you use exercise as a punishment, or you're trying to train the same way in your 40s as you did in your 20s and your 30s, your body doesn't like it. It starts to release, we're talking about the stress hormones, it starts to release cortisol again. Your muscles, as you know, I'm sure, as a trainer, etc., they physically have to have a rest and recovery period, or you're not going to grow your muscle. You're going to risk injury because your ligaments and your tissues and your muscles didn't have time to repair themselves before you start ripping them asunder again, with micro tears doing weightlifting or anything like that. And when your body doesn't get enough rest, even if all you're doing is cardio, your stress hormones are going to elevate, and that can lead to burnout, from a physical source, as well as emotional aspects of just not giving yourself a rest. So you can have things like cognitive fog, irritability, to say nothing of aches and pains or nagging injuries like, a swollen elbow that never gets better because you never give it the rest that is required for it to get better. All of those things you have to start to accept and work with and against instead of against as you age, as you get older. So the way that I work out now is so different from the way that I was working out in my late 20s and my 30s, as an athlete, because I tried to still do the same things and I ended up exhausted. I ended up injuring myself, or continuing to have nagging injuries. And that kept me from being able to work out at all sometimes, which, talk about a spiral, that's not good for your body image. That's not good for your weight. You miss those endorphins and the positive mental activity that you get from those. And so it becomes a spiral too if you don't start to work with your body chemistry and with your body aging as you go. And that's not to say that you shouldn't still have an active workout routine, but for example, I don't do um I don't do heavy shoulder loaded lifts anymore because I have some lower back disc issues, and every time I would weigh that heavy weight on my shoulders, my back would be out for like 5 days, and so I couldn't work out. So I lift other ways that aren't shoulder dependent, but I go with it, and I can still like do the leg press machine for ridiculous amounts of weight. I don't care if people say it's not real, it's real to me. And my back doesn't hurt when I do that. And I can continue to be active and I continue to be enjoying myself. I don't run the same way I did. My knees don't like it, but I will go for a 4-mile walk every day with a weighted vest. And so you just find new ways to challenge yourselves yourself in a way that doesn't increase your stress. It decreases your stress, but still gives you the cardiovascular and the muscular workout that is so important for your brain health and for your longevity. And also make you feel good again about what your body can do, rather than not knowing what it can do because you're sitting in a sedentary job, or you're scrolling or something like that.
Mhm. I had a knee surgery that really didn't go well
Mhm.
almost 2 years ago now, and I had to change how I worked out. I couldn't
Mhm.
work out for a long time, which was really hard for me, except literally walking at 2 miles an hour on a treadmill.
Mhm.
And then I started doing yoga, and I just do it's a 15-minute routine. I follow someone on the YouTube. Love her. She's a great instructor, and I could just do it on my own at the gym, and I've fallen in love with it. And I think that a lot of women, they try to hold on to things that, like you said, it was hard to let go of some of the activities, the lifting, the muscularity and things like, and then it's just like, but this is not the phase anymore, or this is not this chapter anymore. It was a
Mhm.
great chapter. We had a good time, and now I'm going to go into this new chapter. And sometimes it is hard to let go of it, and the more you try to hold on to it, the more miserable you are. And if you
Mhm.
just let go and say, this is what I'm doing now. I don't know if it's forever. Maybe it's a
Mhm.
week, maybe it's 3 years, but this is where I'm at now. And I don't think it's easy. And like you said, it's a lot less stress and discomfort in your mental and physical health.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Now, as we wrap, what I would like from you is to talk about what you're doing. You're a phenomenal woman, have accomplished a lot. You're powerful, physically and just mentally. You're an awesome person, and you've taken everything you've done in your life, and you're moving into another chapter. And it sounds like doing some speaking. So, tell us more about what you're doing, where to find you, how to
Mhm.
follow you, how to get in touch with you, and just how people can stay connected and stay around you so that they can keep learning from you.
Oh, thank you so much, first of all. That was
You're welcome.
so lovely. So yeah, in September, I left the practice of law after 22 years. I've been working as a chief legal officer for a law firm, and in September, I shifted into professional high performance coaching. And more recently, I've been moving into more speaking. I love to speak to people to help them figure out how to burn down their limiting beliefs and build the life that they really want to live using neuroscience and mental performance mastery. And it's something that I love, that is a passion of mine. And I feel like if I could help other women, help anyone really in their lives, embrace that growth mindset and let let the neuroscience work for them instead of against them, that you can do really amazing things with your life. So if anyone is interested in me giving a talk to their group or their conference, they can reach me at Jess at thelegalathlete.com. That's my email. They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Jess Sargus on LinkedIn, always pretty active there with my content. And also on my website, thelegalathlete.com. But probably, I think the best place to find actionable tips and keep up with me is my podcast, the Legal Athlete Podcast. And that's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Girl, you got that down. Thank you.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And
Sure.
I would say the only thing left to say is you go, girl.
You go, girl, Morgan. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again for being here. Are you open to doing me a favor? Please hit that plus sign to follow this podcast, rate and review, and then share this podcast with at least one woman in your life that you care about.